Welcome back everybody to our study of the United States in the Gilded Age. In the last lesson what we did was look at the economic developments which took place during this period. We looked at, for example, the importance of the growing monopolization of companies during this period and some of the implications that this would have on industry and on competition within markets. This lesson we're going to carry on looking at the various different social and economic changes that we see during the Gilded Age period, focusing on agricultural developments, because agriculture is still a very important element of the society and the economy of the United States in the 1860s to the 1890s. So we focused mainly in the last lesson on industrial developments which takes place. So when we looked at, for example, the monopolistic corporations, such as that relating to oil, that relating to steel, for example, that relating to railways, we looked at these in relationships, these were essentially in relation to the idea of industrial developments and some of the industries and the economic implications of the rise of these industries. We're going to talk about how agriculture developed in this period in this lesson. So during this period, we have to note that agriculture was very positive in terms of the impact that it had over the rest of the US in terms of society. The development of the railroads saw the farming regions able to essentially transport their produce to the growing urban areas in the north and beyond. This is quite an interesting sort of symbiotic relationship that is had between two of the modes of production within an economy. On the one hand, you have the growing industrialization of areas of the United States, especially in the urban areas, especially in the north. And in order to feed that growing industrial might that is beginning to take shape during this period, you have to use agriculture to help develop that. And with the development of railroads, it's easier than ever for farmers to be able to essentially export their produce from their regions to the northern regions, to industrial regions, and to urban areas. An example of this is that between 1870 and 1900, the number of farms doubled to 5.7 million, and wheat production had increased to 600 million. So we can see here just how important the agricultural developments were for the development of industry during this period, but also just how much it grew in and of itself during this period. And this was fed partly because of the fact that we have a development in industry, but also because of the fact that the transport of produce was easier than ever to achieve owing to the development of railroads. The number of cattle had risen to 68 million, and this was really a lot of indications of just pure growth in terms of the agricultural sectors of the economy. But this is not to suggest that there weren't any problems, that it was a perfect system, because of course there were obviously issues that takes place during this period. Many farmers, for example, were consistently in debt, so there was always this consistent debt obligation that was held over farmers, that essentially not many of them managed to break even in a number of these different areas. Harvests and markets were consistently unstable. This is obviously a problem for any area of an economy, especially when it comes to agriculture, because owing to the fact that harvests are unstable, that leads to a situation where essentially markets become unstable. Because if a harvest fails, then it implies that the price and the demand for the remaining agricultural produce that you've made will increase. And so the market value of those products are very unstable for the majority of the time, owing to the fact that we have unstable harvests. So when we have situations where the market is unstable and there is less value added to the produce that is had, this means that there is less profits that is gained to the farmers, and vice versa, where the value of that food increases. Farmers would often borrow unexpected income from the harvest. This is one of the reasons why they were consistently in debt. The essential What this essentially means is they expect a certain amount of profit from the harvest, and so therefore, before the harvest has even happened, they will borrow that amount immediately so that they can do whatever payments they need, whatever they want with that money, essentially, and they would be fine because they would know that a harvest will bring back all of those profits, and they would be able to pay that money back quite easily. That's all well and good, but if there is an unstable and inconsistent harvest, then you have a situation where you have borrowed all of that income, expecting the harvest to be good, but if that harvest fails, well then now you're just in debt and you have no way of paying that off. So of course that's one of the reasons why farmers were consistently in debt during this period. It should also be noted at this time that there was no central banking system, so local banking institutions would often charge really high interest rates, often between 10 and 40%. This is further important when it comes to the borrowing of money and the borrowing of income, because of the fact that if you are borrowing on expected harvest, well, not only if that harvest fails will you have to pay back that amount, but you'll also have to pay back that amount with interest. And owing to the fact that there is no central banking system, and given the fact that local banking institutions will charge between 10 and 40% interest, that means that they're going to have to pay back way more than they borrowed in the first place, and way more than they could even possibly begin to even pay, given the fact that their harvest had failed. By 1900, as many as 33% of all farmers became tenants. So given the fact that we have, on the one hand, growth in terms of the industry itself, but on the other hand, we have problems internal to the industry in terms of individuals actually suffering as a result of some of the market practices, we start to see a lot of agricultural protest. So from the 1870s, for example, many farmers would join together in what became known as cooperatives, which essentially is working together to try and eliminate the middlemen on the one hand, and also gain control of the purchase of goods and supplying of the markets. So they were trying to essentially take ownership of more of the modes of production that takes place within the agricultural process. By the 1890s, these cooperatives had grown into a single national farmers alliance, which would essentially then morph into the People's Party or the Populist Party. And we will get to the Populist Party in future lessons' time when we look at what their impact was on American politics. Finally, then, let's think about urbanization. The period saw a considerable amount of movement into the cities, primarily from people seeking work and primarily from people seeking good work as a result of the growing industrial revolution. This same thing happened in all areas and facets of industrialization. So, as a side note for some of you, you might have seen that we've been recording and doing lessons on Tsarist and Communist Russia at the same time as these lessons, and the same exact thing happened in Russia when they had an industrial revolution in and around the late 1800s. They saw considerable numbers of people moving away from the rural areas into urban cities to seek work, owing to the growth in these new industries. The same thing happens here. This is a process known as urbanization. And there are some examples. So between 1850 and 1900, the population of Chicago grew from 30,000 to 1 million. Now, Chicago is on the sort of western side of the United States anyway, so more people were moving west, but in addition to that, more people were becoming urbanized as a result of the Industrial Revolution. The population of New York had gone from 1 million to 3.5 million in 1900. Again, a considerable increase in terms of people. And on its face, this shows great promise because it shows that more people, more labor supply in these workforces means that there is going to be more economic output, more industrial output, which is going to grow the economy more and more and more. So, for example, by the 1890s, skyscrapers were being built with as many as 25 stories being seen. We can see by 1902, there were 66 skyscrapers being built in Lower Manhattan. We can see that essentially the New York that we know and understand to be today, how it looks and how big it is today, can be largely traced back to this period where we see the great building of all of these huge skyscrapers, and this is obviously a result of the growing flood of people into these regions. But this is not to suggest that there weren't any problems, of course. Many people lived in poverty, and owing to the fact that there was a huge increase in the population between these periods, it meant that people would be overcrowded and living in overcrowded conditions. Essentially, the housing for these people did not keep up with the amount of people that were coming in. Political corruption was still being encouraged through various patronage systems as well, and we note that, of course, this is the Gilded Age, so we are talking about a period that is marked by significant corruption and weak presidents, which we will get to in more detail in future lessons' time as well.